Hello, welcome to the webinar. My name is Stephen Helm. I'm a product marketing manager here at WatchGuard Technologies. Really appreciate you all taking the time to join us for our webinar today. We're going to look at unified AI in XDR and talk about this visionary truth or the visionary idea of a single source of cyber truth and how we can use AI and XDR together to bring this to sort of a reality and the benefits that will come as a result of that. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping notes for folks on the call today. You have several audio options. You can use your computer or dial in if you have any issues throughout the presentation. Recommend maybe you pivot to one or the other, depending on which one you're on now. We do have a Q&A box in the tool this morning, so if you have any questions as the presentation goes on, feel free to drop them in there. I'll probably address them at the end of the presentation, as it'll be difficult for me to see them come in real time. And if I'm unable to address them at the time, I'll follow up with you after the call. And we are going to record this session, so you're welcome to share it with any of your fellow colleagues or friends if you find it interesting. And then finally, this is eligible for continuing professional education credits, so you can apply to use this for satisfying some of those credit requirements. Before we jump into the content, just for folks on the call who may not be aware of who WatchGuard is, just at a really high level, we've been in the cybersecurity space since 1996, and I think the most important thing for you to really understand is today that we are 100% channel. We sell entirely through our network of distributors and partners, and supporting them, really focused on solving the issues for small to mid-sized enterprise businesses, smaller security teams. That's our laser focus. I think there's important context to have as we start out the presentation here for folks on the call. So for an agenda, what we're going to talk about today, we'll start off just at a very high level talking about the evolution of AI. Then we'll talk about some of the impact on cyber actors, some real ways we've seen cyber actors start to use these tools today, how they're using them maliciously, and then we'll start to talk about what's next, and specifically this concept of multimodal AI. We'll define what that is, why it's relevant for our discussion, how it's potentially going to be used into the future, and the implications there. And then on the back end of the presentation, we'll talk about XDR and really how the fact is it's become essential cybersecurity, even for those smaller businesses, those smaller security teams today. It's something that they really should have in place or be considering putting in place here in the next few months or year or so. And we'll talk about AI and XDR together, what that looks like in practice, really how WatchGuard views that, and really what our vision is long term around using AI and XDR together to solve, again, the issues that our partners and their clients really deal with on a regular basis. And then we'll have some time at the end, hopefully, for some question and answer opportunities. So with that, let's jump right into the content now. Evolution of artificial intelligence. Chances are you've seen these graphics or some iteration of these graphics if you've attended a webinar either with WatchGuard or a similar organization over the last couple of years, quite frankly. But just to get everybody on the same page here about artificial intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence, the concept that we sort of understand it, how we sort of understand it, really originates in the 1950s, right? Coming out of the Second World War, all the evolution of computing that occurred through that process really started to come up with this idea of an intelligent computer that could really replicate or exceed human intelligence. And it's really evolved as something conceptual then, all the way up to today where we have generative AI. And one of the key steps along that evolution was machine learning, the idea that we could take computers and enable them to learn from existing data sets, improve and become more efficient, and then deep learning, right? Adding more sophistication, layers of neural networks, able to process data and make much more specific decisions. But really, I would say generative AI is really a major inflection point on the whole narrative around artificial intelligence, right? When you talk about something like ChatGPT, which came out in 2021, right, that gave people the opportunity to really use and play with artificial intelligence to a degree they've not had the opportunity before, something like ChatGPT. Where a lot of these technologies were really reserved to the more computer-focused areas of operations and technology. technology, now everybody can really go into ChatGPT, prompt it to take very sophisticated actions on their behalf, and get very creative using it. And sort of that opportunity to play with the tool is one of the reasons I think we've driven a lot of attention around artificial intelligence in the last couple of years here, and it's driven a lot of hype there. And I think it's become much more of a real thing, tangible thing for the larger population, not just folks focused in cybersecurity. And so, when we look at this from a cybersecurity perspective, there's really some positives and there's some negatives. And I think it's important to start out with the positives around artificial intelligence, right? And I want to dispel a misperception here, a misconception, right? And I think SANS does a great job here in their latest AI survey, and that's that AI is not a job killer for cybersecurity, right? It's actually something that's going to enhance overall productivity and has been shown to enhance job satisfaction, right? We hear all the time how overwhelmed folks are with false positives and alerts and having to triage and try and make sense of all of this noise within this environment. That's really burning folks out. AI has a positive impact in this way, and we think it's going to bring a lot of value here. And I wanted to clarify that right off the bat. And ultimately, that's because AI is helping people become more efficient and effective. And I've used the spy versus spy graphic here for a specific reason. And that's because, the security practitioners, the IT teams using AI can become more efficient and more effective, right? They can get to solutions faster. They can tackle more complex issues using artificial intelligence. But the same is true of threat actors. They're able to become more efficient in their targeting. They're able to become more effective in the actual tools they're using to infiltrate our networks and attack our environments, right? So, this is true on both sides of the coin here from an artificial intelligence perspective. So I like to use the spy versus spy. I suppose there should be an AI versus AI graphic. Maybe I'll have to have our creative team do a different treatment going forward. But I think one of the things, again, to just drive it home on the positivity side of the house before we jump into the more scary discussion around artificial intelligence, is that 90% of security pros believe today that AI is going to benefit their teams, their security teams, much more than threat actors. And part of this is resourcing and skills, right? If you're putting the right investments behind these technologies and deploying them correctly, right, you should have the advantage compared to most of your threat actor groups. We'll talk about the different types of threat actors a little bit later in the presentation, and you'll see some areas where that might not be the case, and hopefully that will sort of help you understand the landscape with a bit more nuance as well. And so now let's start talking about some of the negative implications for artificial intelligence in the cybersecurity arena, right? And I think some of these are pretty obvious, but the UK National Cybersecurity Center called this out in one of their more recent reports. AI lowers the barrier for novice cyber criminals, right? These groups that don't necessarily have the skill sets, the training, right, are able to get very, very powerful AI tools and use them to become, again, more effective in what they're trying to do. And they called out specifically here access and information gathering operations. And they specifically called out the fact that they think this is going to really accelerate and contribute to the global ransomware threat over the next few years. So this is an immediate concern, right, that's really escalating the cyber landscape in the short term. And so, what are they doing? What are threat actors using artificial intelligence to do today, right? I think the big one that's caught a lot of attention, and rightfully so, is deepfakes, right? This idea that now we can come in and generate audio or video, impersonate someone's voice, even impersonate a video of them, not just, let's say, on a recording, but they're starting to be able to do it within a live, broadcast or transmission. You're hearing about people interviewing for jobs using, Zoom or one of the other video platforms, and using deepfake technology to appear as a different type of employee and go through that process. So this is an area that's a big concern, and there's not a lot of great solutions in the immediate term to it. And that really feeds into this idea of phishing attacks, this idea AI can help craft messages, be they email messages, text messages, right, by analyzing social media, by analyzing communications and tailoring them. And what we're seeing is actually coupling of deep fakes and phishing attacks, where, that initial email that comes across, it says, oh, I have this urgent request, click this link. People aren't falling for that as much, but they might get a deep fake call shortly thereafter that impersonates that voice of the person who originally sent that email, right? And that puts the thumb on the scale a little bit more, and it is more convincing and breaks down some of our traditional ways that we sort of check against these attacks. And I think we'll only see more of that. And then things like password cracking, brute force methods can be made more efficient by helping to generate probability and help them guess around some of these passwords rather than just pure brute force. And then, data mining, the idea that you can scrape more valuable data, make sense of the massive amounts of data in some of these areas that you might be trying to steal or manipulate. And then really the most important, I think, for the rest of the discussion that we're going to have in this webinar is this idea of attack automation, right? This idea that we're going to be able to use bots to find vulnerabilities, to automate exploitation, right? To optimize our ransomware attacks for specific environments. We're already starting to see this today, but this automated idea that we're going to be able to chain together attacks is really the next phase of what I think we should expect from a threat actor perspective to have a major impact on our businesses and how we're securing businesses going forward. So I mentioned the AI impact on cyber actors, and it really is different depending on really your level of sophistication, your skills, your resources. And I thought this was a really great breakdown of how this plays across your different skill set audiences, right? And so I'll start really on the right-hand side, these less skilled threat actors, right? These are your folks who might be hackers for hire. They're opportunistic, right? They're looking for the low-hanging fruit to attack and exploit. Very limited cyber skills or novice cyber skills, right? Don't have a lot of resources, and that's important here, right? Your resources are what you're using, whether it's a network resource, a storage resource, whatever it is, hosting resources to push these attacks. So they're limited in a resource perspective next compared to some of the other folks on this chart here. But again, the benefit here for them around AI is that lower barrier to entry. They're able to take on more sophisticated attacks, do more sophisticated things with these tools than they may have otherwise been able to. And so you can see that reflected a little bit in the uplift judgments that we have below. Reconnaissance is made much easier for these groups. Social engineering, we've talked about that, right? Significant uplift for them being able to tailor some of their phishing and things like that. From a tool perspective, a little bit less, right? They're probably not going to be able to make very sophisticated malware and exploits, right? They don't have that skill set to really know how to use these tools to design those things. And lateral movement, again, probably not much, if any, there. Across the board, though, exfiltration is going to get an uplift from these tools, right? And so if we move into the middle column, right, this is where you start to see some of those state actors, your more commercial organizations, organized cyber criminal groups, right? They are going to have more capability for things like reconnaissance and social engineering, right? So the uplift there will be minimal. They've already had some tools, some techniques that they've refined and built. So, those things are probably not as valuable. But they'll still get the uplift from that exfiltration and social engineering, right? That ability to more quickly tailor things like phishing emails for their audiences. And then on the far left, the highly capable, and this is most commonly state threat actors, highly skilled, not just in cyber attacks and cyber warfare, but also in artificial intelligence, right? They're well resourced. They have the infrastructure and support to build the tools that they need to permeate or perpetrate their attacks against their targets, right? They're the best place to really fully harness the potential of artificial intelligence in advanced cyber operations, right? And so again, moderate uplift from reconnaissance, right? Social engineering, an uplift there. But then I think very interestingly, we could expect to see that their malware, their exploits, because they so intimately understand artificial intelligence and how to use these tools, we should expect to see that they'll be able to really leverage them against malware to design more effective tools, more evasive tools, right? And exploits to attack our environments. And I think one of the important things that you should leave and understand here is that really this is a process. The highly capable organizations are really going to come out with the nastiest tools, the zero-day malware, the new techniques that really keep you up at night. But those are eventually going to permeate down to the less capable audiences over time, right? And this is something we've seen in the past. Separate from artificial intelligence, if you think about something like ransomware as a service. The highly capable teams were initially going out and doing major cyber attacks against businesses. But over time, they sort of outsourced or took on an outsourced provider role, right? And provided that as a service to separate themselves from the actual final attacks while still monetizing and still providing the resources to help facilitate those attacks for the lesser skilled audiences. So I think the same sort of shift here is something that we should expect to see with artificial intelligence going forward. Now, I talked about the state-sponsored cyber attack here, and I think, given the audience, I talked about to start out the call, we really have focused on the mid-market businesses, the MSPs, the partners that support those organizations. You might think that we're really not a target for nation state organizations, and by and large that's true. In most cases they're looking for the bigger organizations, the ones that are more lucrative to attack. But we've seen that starting to change, and I think one of the more pressing areas where this is the case was called out by the FBI and the CISA about the Ghost ransomware group. And this is a nation state organization out of China. And they are specifically targeting small businesses, critical infrastructure, government networks, right? Schools, healthcare, manufacturing, right? And they're specifically targeting exploits and exploiting outdated software and firmware, right? So I won't go into a lot of the details here about how they're actually attacking these types of organizations. There's a lot being written today about the Ghost ransomware group. But I really wanted to call this out because even though they've been operating since really early 2021 and are a global network, their focus on the smaller organizations, things like healthcare and school types of organizations, means that these are types of organizations you should be aware of. You should understand that they have a tremendous capability and sophistication and ability to attack our organizations, and that we should expect to see, again, some of this leak down and eventually be pointed at us, unfortunately. So we need a higher degree of sophistication in our own security stacks and capabilities to really to respond against these threats going forward. And so, to talk a little bit more about the nation state actors and how they're exploiting AI today, I think Google did a really great job on their adversarial misuse of generative AI report, right? And so they really looked at their own Gemini tool that they released, sort of a chat GPT, if you will, competitor, and analyzed really how these were being used by different threat actor groups, and specifically nation state threat actor groups from China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And so in this report, they actually broke it out by really the kill chain, the various steps of the kill chain, and how these different threat actor groups are using just the generative AI tool to try and improve what they're doing to make them more effective and efficient, as I said to start the call. So things like reconnaissance on IT service providers, right? People who are providing the backbone for these businesses, right? Trying to find out what their relationship is, potentially as a way to infiltrate via supply chain and things like that into certain organizations. They're doing things like developing code for webcam recordings, rewriting publicly available malware into different languages so they can repurpose it and potentially sneak it by traditional signature AV. They're improving phishing techniques on the delivery side. We talked about that from a tailoring perspective, but this multifaceted phishing idea that you can come in, craft an email, do a voice impersonation, and hit them with multiple touch points to try and get them to take that action that you'd like them to take. They're starting to reverse engineer things like server components for endpoint detection and response tools, right? So they can move laterally within environments, right? They're using self-signed certificates, checking IPs of admins, right? And then when they're actually on the objective, doing things like scripts to extract emails. All of these types of prompts and uses of generative AI tools were already being seen by these tool providers themselves, right? And so this isn't even to speak about purpose-built malicious artificial intelligence tools that may be being built by some of these nation-state groups themselves, right? So I'm sure there's similar work being done on the ChatGPT side of the house, on the other major providers of generative AI. But I just thought this was a really great sort of cross section of the attack chain and where there's value and actors are actually gleaning value today in using these tools as they push attacks against businesses. And that really brings us to the next part of our conversation, and that's really where we're going, right? I just talked about the various prompts and ways that folks were using, or cyber actors were using the chat GPTs of the world to improve their skill set. But we're really on the cusp of what's called multimodal AI, and this idea that multimodal AI will create the ability to have entire attack chains, right? And so every year, just like many of the cybersecurity brands in the world, we put out a series of predictions where we say, by the end of this year, by the end of 2025, we expect these things will have happened, or we'll see them in the wild. And so Corey Knockreiner, our chief security officer, one of his big ones that he called out this year was, again, the malicious use of multimodal AI to create entire attack chains. So we'll talk about what that means here over the next couple of slides. So I thought that this is a really great quote from the founder of unsupervised learning, talking about multimodal AI, really what the implications with that means. And he says, attackers will soon be able to specify desired outcomes as opposed to needing to manually control every step. From there, agents will carry out the attack, a continuous, never sleeping basis, right? A 24/7 type of ability to attack, right? And the required steps to make those outcomes a reality will start to occur. That's really where we're going, right? And so if you think about those tools like ChatGPT, people's ability to go in and say, hey, I'd like you to make me, a video or an image or something like that with very specific prompts. Imagine that level of ease of use for an unskilled cyber attacker to be able to go in and say, here's some basic information about a target organization I'd like to go after. I would like to do this type of attack. Please help me build that type of attack chain. That's the type of direction we're headed, and it's a pretty daunting reality if we get to that point in what that could mean for businesses if they haven't taken the right steps and put in the right sort of counter tools to prevent these types of approaches in their environment. And so take a step back a little bit on the multimodal AI concept. What is multimodal, right? And basically it means several different models, right? You're using different layered models to do different functions. And really what this allows you to do is identify patterns across different types of data inputs, right? Instead of doing a very limited, narrow type of data that you're able to ingest and analyze, it broadens the scope of those different data types that you're able to bring in. And this means you're able to find more patterns, more distinction, do more correlation, and really provide more insights from this data, right? And so the way it works is, you have at a high level 3 different types of modules. You have the input module, really a layer of neural networks, right, for ingesting and processing all these different data types, right? Being able to parse through different data types from very different types of sets, right? Be it If you're an attacker, this could be video, audio, images, those types of things. If they're building deepfakes, as an example. Then you have that fusion module, right, that correlates and processes all these different data types together, right, and really presents them into a single related data set. It starts to find that commonality, that thread of relevance from the data. And then from the output perspective, it's going to translate this data into actionable results for human operators and systems, right? And so again, the idea is it's able to take a much larger, much more diverse data set, right, on behalf of threat actors, make sense of it, make it useful, right, put it in a format that allows them to be effective, right? And so, that from a security perspective is pretty daunting in what it could provide for threat actors and making them more effective. But I think, again, if we go back to the positivity side of the house, the same type of technology with artificial intelligence can be applied really on the cybersecurity defenses side of the house, right? This idea of identifying patterns across different data types and different inputs, right? The same concepts apply here, the different modules to ingest your data, to correlate and make sense and make a related thread, and then output it for your human operators and systems, right? So, this multimodal concept, this idea is relevant for both parties, and really what brings us to our XDR story ultimately. Because extended detection and response, if you're not familiar with this term, was really a response to this idea that our security stacks have gotten so big and so disconnected and siloed, right? They're very, very difficult to manage, make sense of, to respond across. And over the years, there's been a number of different tools that have been introduced to try and alleviate this challenge. SIM is one, right? This idea that, hey, you just take all this data and you put it in one dashboard and visualize and report against it, and that makes it effective. But what we've actually seen is for the smaller security teams, for the partners that serve and the MSPs that serve them, those types of tools are really more built for large SOCs, built for teams that have a big bench of cybersecurity experts who are able to make sense and do some of the manual correlation across these different silos. And extended detection and response is really an effort to automate a lot of that process together, and bring it together and sort of correlate across your different points of your security stack, right? And so you're scoring incidents, you're providing this information in a single UI, you're putting the opportunity for automation, right? And then things like remediation can be integrated. So you can detect something, let's say, on one part of your environment and then remediate on another part, as an example there. And so, this sort of extended detection and response approach really marries up very well with a lot of what I've been talking about to start the presentation. This idea that you're able to take this disparate data sets, really correlate them into something useful and actionable for your security team, and then act on those things as a result. And so, why is XDR something that's so valuable today and something you should be considering, even sort of distinct of artificial intelligence? The big one is that it eliminates security gaps and blind spots. And, we just talked about those individual silos. But, and if your endpoints aren't talking to your network and your authentication incidents aren't sort of being correlated with, what's going on your endpoints and your network, right? That's blind. There's visibility gaps in that, right? Because no individual solution independently is going to have all the information they need typically to be able to stop some of these most sophisticated attacks, right? It also boosts efficiency. I started out the presentation with efficiency as a big value here. But automation and AI here with XDR can really help with a lot of that complex threat analysis. I'll talk about what that looks like in practice a little bit later in the presentation. But ultimately, that efficiency will help reduce costs around staffing and time, right? Offer stronger security to happier clients, right? You can be proactive with an XDR type of solution, right? Part of what we're able to do, and I'll show this a little bit later, is look at and find those gaps within the environment, and be able to have a conversation about how to improve cyber hygiene with some of the tools here that are available, even before you notice or were to detect an ongoing attack. You can solve more complex security problems, right? if you're a managed service provider, if you're a VAR, and you're providing cybersecurity today, your ability to solve more complex security problems is really key to your growth going forward, right? Whether that's compliance, whether that's supply chain, it's not just about protecting the business. It's also about helping that business maintain access to their network, maintain access to their market, right, and how they actually operate their business, be that subject to government controls and compliance and supply chain requirements. And then finally, it's a high growth market, right? If you're offering cybersecurity today, right, detection and response, specifically extended detection and response services, is one of the fastest growing areas of cybersecurity. A lot of the other areas you're starting to see a little bit more commoditization. So this is something your clients are probably asking about and looking for in one shape or form. So it's really a time to start considering XDR and deploying XDR for your clients today. Now, to unfortunately bring us a little bit back to the negative here on XDR, I think that this is it's not a new term, it's not a new concept, right? It's been around for a few years now, and I think in a lot of people's minds, XDR is a promise unfulfilled, right? In fact, if you look at some of the reports from Gartner, some of the blogs and different articles that have been released by Security Boulevard and Tech Target, right, they call out some of the shortcomings in the XDR market that exist, right, as they see it today. And one of the big ones is, a lot of these tools require you to hire more people, upskill your team, right? They add more noise to an environment or overwhelm security teams, right? And our argument is that a lot of the difficulty that we've seen with XDR solutions early on, in part, is because they've really been driven by endpoint detection and response vendors trying to extend their solutions and take that telemetry and things from their endpoint products and correlate it with more points of the environment to add more value to their overall EDR story, right? And EDR has a tremendous value in the sense that most of your attacks end up on an endpoint eventually. So there's a tremendous value in the visibility you can get there, but it's only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to XDR. And if you're starting with that foundation of, okay, let's extend our EDR value, rather than looking at the challenges of IT teams, MSPs more holistically, and saying, how can we use XDR, artificial intelligence, to solve these challenges? This is why you end up with a result where the noise is overwhelming, right? You're not starting necessarily with the end in mind and what you want that user experience to be as they're working with your XDR tools. So that's sort of our feeling on where there's been some shortcomings in the market so far. And so that really brings us to what WatchGuard is doing with XDR and artificial intelligence. And so, one thing to be very clear about when we're talking about WatchGuard is we've been playing in the XDR space for many years at this point in time. In fact, if you were to roll back, I think it was about 2017, we were one of the first organizations on the firewall side of the house that started to do correlation between our endpoint security products and the firewall to improve detection, to automate some response, and provide that value there. And now we offer what we call ThreatSync Core as a core component of all of our WatchGuard Cloud-enabled solutions. So if you use WatchGuard Cloud today with one of our endpoint solutions or firewall solutions, you have a foundational XDR solution today already within your security stack. But what we've done in the last year or so is introduce a brand new artificial intelligence engine we call ThreatSync Plus, right? And this is an engine that we've brought over that monitors automatically your entire threat surface and looks for early signs of misconfiguration, vulnerability, or breach, right? So it's a multi-layered AI engine. I'll talk about what that looks like a little bit more in the next couple of slides. 100% from the cloud, right? This is an AI engine that really sits above your environment and provides overwatch for that threat surface, right? And in that sense, it operates outside the network for that full visibility. And then it provides that intelligent detection and response capabilities across your entire threat surface. So again, this is a dedicated AI engine, very sophisticated, that is really providing that overwatch as part of our XDR offering. And so, how it works, really, we make it very easy for security teams to uncover evidence of threats. And there's a couple of areas that we do this. The first one is data breadth, right? And this is really the idea of unified AI that I teed off the conversation with, right? And that's what we are able to take the breadth of data, the huge set of diverse data types from traffic logs and net flow and VPN, enter ID, and more, right? And ingest all of these different data types into a single artificial intelligence agent, right? So a tool that's able to perform very sophisticated unified analysis under one AI system, and make really strong insights in correlations and responses as a result. Part of that process is what we call intelligent baselining, right? It's going to sit in your environment and understand what normal looks like for your entire computing environment, your networks, your endpoints, right? How your users are interacting and logging in, those types of things, and create a baseline there. And from that baseline, that's where the artificial intelligence tool starts to determine and identify anomalous behavior, that fall outside of that baseline as an initial way of detecting malicious behavior. We also map these things to frameworks, right? All of our alerts are automatically mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, provide a little bit more information when it's available, when we found those things, right? And that makes it very easy for security practitioners to understand, what it is that they're looking at. And then smart alerts, right? We'll talk about the alerts a little bit more in the next couple of slides. But we provide really distilled alerts that provide charts, visualizations, historical activity timelines, right? That make it easy to understand what happened and why you should care. And then the final thing here is we enable response actions, whether they're automatic or manual, right? We can respond directly from the tool on the network, on the endpoint devices, and even against the identity infrastructure. And so, I mentioned the data ingest, and that is a differentiating point for ThreatSync Plus and how WatchGuard is using artificial intelligence. And this is really what that looks like at a very high level, right? We're able to ingest flow and log data from these platforms today, but obviously increasing those platforms over time, and certainly dramatically before the close of the year, to include things like endpoint as an example. And what we're able to do is take that raw data and enrich it, push it through a process of collection and feature engineering, right? Take it through our learning algorithm, so it goes through that process of understanding and baselining the environment, right? And our end goal here is to actually distill these down into alerts. And so you can see on the right-hand side, this is an example of 1 week of data using our tool here, where you start out with 2.73 billion flows that were detected by this organization, right? And we're able to, through this process, distill them down into 5 million events and around 9,000 behaviors. And then ultimately, across the week, 21 alerts. And that means for your security team, 3 alerts per day. And that's a big, I think, important thing to call out here, right? These tools are only as effective as your team's ability to use them, to implement them, to act on the information they're providing. So if a tool is dumping 100 alerts on your team a day, or even as many as 20 alerts, depending on the size of your IT team, really it's not doing you many favors, right? And so this is where the idea of real strong correlation and turning these into very clear, prioritized and scored smart alerts is an area of differentiation for us. And 3 alerts per day is extremely tenable for most teams to manage. And so that's really one of our guiding principles, is just try and minimize the burden on the IT teams and the partners who are responsible for managing these tools. And so this is what it looks like in sort of another vision, right? Another way to look at this type of approach, right? Where you can see we're taking our traffic logs from fireboxes from the WatchGuard side of the house. Also, we're the ability to do so on third-party firewalls, right? Using NetFlow, DHCP, VPN, right? Also able to take information from network and switches and some of the Active Directory and identification information, right? But then also the cloud. workloads, application activity, right? We're all feeding this all into the same artificial intelligence engine, our ThreatSync Plus engine here. And then we're even introducing later in the year our multi-factor authentication solution, our endpoint security solutions with more depth into providing more of the data, ingesting it into this unified artificial intelligence tool here. And so what that allows us to do is a couple of things. First of all, it's unified detection, threats across the environment, across these different components, right? We're able to establish policies, right, that are looked at universally and flagged when there's violations of those policies. We're able to improve investigation. You know, you're visualizing what's going on, you're providing that correlation and scoring. You have a very distinct workflow and playbooks that can be built around response and remediation, as well as the ability to automate, right? You can do things like say, hey, if you get a critical threat score on an endpoint that hits a 10, we want it to take these response actions, like delete a file, isolate the platform. And then reporting and compliance. And I'll spend a little bit of time on the back end, the final couple slides here, because I think this is an area that provides a tremendous value that people don't necessarily think of when they think of something like XDR and artificial intelligence and more generally. So this is what it looks like if you're an IT team, or if you're one of our partners who's working with the ThreatSync Plus platform. You're going to have a dashboard on the left-hand side that's going to show a timeline of incidents. It's going to show a spectrum of pending incidents and the severity of those incidents. We have a sophisticated threat scoring model here that ranks everything from 1 to 10, depending on severity, obviously 10 being the highest level of severity. And then you can see here in the middle here that we even have the ability to take action right within this tool. So you can jump in and do, for example, device isolation when you had a piece of malware potentially discovered on an endpoint, right? We have examples where the endpoint solution has blocked a threat, but you still need to do some cleanup there. So you can automate or manually isolate that device right from the tool, and then facilitate the cleanup or pass it off for cleanup. And so really this becomes really the place where people start their day. If you're a security practitioner, you jump in, and if you're looking at, trying to get a sense of your security posture of your business, where to prioritize, this is the dashboard where people come into to start their day and really understand how to go about that process. And that's something that was a key part of our strategy here at WatchGuard going forward. And so, I mentioned a little bit around compliance and reporting, right? We've talked a lot about risk visibility, the benefits that provides for XDR, or as a result of XDR and threat detection, right? But there's value here around compliance, supply chain defense, and cyber insurance as well, right? What we're able to do, because we're using that artificial intelligence agent that's overlaying the entire environment, we're able to reduce the process, the manual processes around compliance, right? We can provide continuous reporting, and basically allows you to come in and use some pre-canned reports around UK Cyber Essentials, ISO 27001, for example, some of the NIST reports, GDPR, right? Pre-canned tools that allow you to, again, run a report and get a true sense of where there's shortcomings, where there's vulnerabilities in the environment. And the nice thing here is too, these are all can be tailored as well. So one of the things that we've seen is CMMC is a very popular compliance area. Well, we could tailor one of these reports for CMMC, or we've seen clients tailor them for CMMC very quickly and get the report that they need to improve their efficiency. Supply chain defense, right? This is one, especially when we're talking about small to mid-sized organizations, right? Increasingly, if they're participating in supply chains, there are cybersecurity requirements placed on them. And sometimes the requirements just require, an IT person to fill out a very detailed, response to a questionnaire around the security approaches for that business. But that can be extremely tedious for some of these small businesses. Right? We have a tool here that allows you to really get those questions answered in an automated fashion, and really could provide a report to those supply chain partners. And we've seen it satisfy even some of those more survey response based approaches. And really the same thing on cyber insurance. These reports are very effective in going to a cyber insurer and saying, look, this is all we're doing. This is an up to date view of our security posture, and using that as evidence to really push that across the finish line and potentially get cybersecurity coverage here. And sort of my last slide here really just shows this in action, right? We have a couple of examples of the reports that we have here. You have your ransomware defense report right here that's going to look at your network, specifically where there's vulnerabilities, give you a bit of a score, call out areas that you can improve and how to actually go about improving those things. We have a network threats report, again, a bit of an expanded look, of your overall network. And then again, an example of a compliance report here on the right-hand side. This one for the ISO 27001, right? Again, scoring model, providing all the information and some specific recommendations on how to improve. And these are tools that we find our clients actually operationalize pretty well within their organization, right? They're using these on a regular basis as sort of an assessment of their posture, but also that keeps something that keeps them honest and is a way for them to track success over time. And so, this is again something that I think is differentiated in how we provide value to different organizations using AI and XDR. Since I very much appreciate your attention on the presentation today. We covered a lot of ground. There's going to be a lot more information we'll be releasing as this story evolves and our product evolves. So stay tuned. Thanks very much.